Yes.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
At Kolami, we acknowledge that we are situated on traditional territories and treaty lands, including those of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations and other Indigenous peoples. As Jews and as a community, may we always strive to fulfill our Jewish value of tzedek tirdon, the pursuit of justice in our society. Good morning. Welcome to the 9th annual Jack Cahan Memorial Lecture. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Karen Payton. I'm a member of Kolami and sit on the Lifelong Jewish Learning Committee here. And Jack Cahan was my dad. On behalf of my family, I'd like to thank the Kolami community for continuing to honor his memory. This year, we're pleased to welcome Congregation Bethel of Windsor and Temple Israel of London to our lecture. More and more, we realize how important it is for small congregations like ours to get to know each other and to collaborate on programs like this. Of course, our thoughts these days are with the people of Israel, and we pray that the war will end soon and that all the hostages will return home. On Remembrance Day, we honor those who serve their country in the name of peace. And on this Remembrance Day, we give particular honor to the members of the IDF who have fallen in the battle against Hamas and to those who continue to fight the terrorists. If there are any current or past service people here this morning, this is for you. Whether you have served as a regular or reserve member of the Canadian Forces, the Israel Defense Forces, the American Forces, or the armed forces of one of our allies, or if you've been active in the Legion or other veterans organizations, please know that we are forever grateful for your service. A little bit about my dad. Many of you knew my dad, but for those who don't, you get to know him a little bit. He was many things in his public life. He was a scoutmaster, he was an actor, he loved Shakespeare. He was a stand-up comedian, he was a top-notch salesman, he was a Kolami singer and resident troublemaker, and he was a lifelong community organizer and activist. But it was his time as an officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force and as a veteran that he was most proud of, and that meant the most to him. Just as so many young Israeli adults have stepped up to serve in the current crisis, it was in a time of global crisis that my father stepped forward to serve Canada and the Allies in the Second World War. He enlisted in the RCAF, and he earned his pilot's wings just as the war was ending. Luckily, he was not sent overseas, but he always did have some kind of some regret about that. Most of his military career was thankfully spent in peacetime. He loved the discipline, the sense of order, the sense of belonging to an important enterprise. He felt great pride in serving his country, and he felt a special pride in being one of the few Jews to make a career in the military. He served in Canada and in post-war France, first as a pilot and then as a public relations officer. His love for the RCAF and for Canada didn't end when he took early retirement in 1965. He was deeply involved in veterans organizations for most of the rest of his life. He served as National Commander and Toronto Post Commander for the Jewish War Veterans of Canada and in leadership roles in the Air Force Association and the Air Crew Association. And as part of the Memory Project, he spoke to countless groups of students and adults about Canada's role as a peacekeeping nation, and specifically about Jewish Canadian military history. Over the years, he marched in parades and laid wreaths at war memorials all over the country. And every year on the Shabbat closest to Remembrance Day, Dad would speak from the Kolami Bima to our community. There was a certain transformation that took place whenever Dad donned his gray flannels and navy blazer, making sure his medals were pinned on just so. He considered it a special duty to educate others about the importance of remembering. He took that duty very seriously, and he embodied the military values of ritual and ceremony and tradition. My mom and dad joined Kolami in 1991, shortly after Avi and I and our kids, and they quickly became everyone's surrogate Bubby and Zadie. They loved our community so very much, and it's a great honor to my family that Kolami has created and embraced the ritual of remembering my father each November. He and my mom would have been so proud and grateful. Sometimes the universe aligns in meaningful ways. Today is one of those occasions. Remembrance Day falls on Shabbat. And today is also the art site of my grandfather, my dad's father, Samuel Cahan. He was very proud of his son for his service to our country, and I honor both of their memories this morning. Please join me in a moment of silence for those who fell so that we might live in peace and freedom. We pause to thank them for what they gave up, what they fought for, what they died for. We pause to thank the veterans still among us for their service. We pause to remember. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. It's my privilege this morning to introduce this year's guest speaker. Cahan Devorah Fick is the spiritual leader to Congregation Bethel of Windsor. She grew up in Lansing, Michigan, and served in the U.S. Air Force as an officer for 7 years before changing course to answer a higher calling, service to Am Yisrael. Devorah was ordained as a chazan in January 2023 through the cantorial program with Aleph, Alliance for Jewish Renewal, and continues to pursue rabbinic smicha through the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York. Devorah is a member of the Association for Rabbis and Cantors of Jewish Renewal, the Michigan Board of Rabbis, Michigan Board of Cantors, and is a founding member of the Reformed Cantors and Cantorial Soloists of Canada. She serves in the Greater Windsor Interfaith Community as a member of the Interfaith Group of Windsor and Essex County, the Military Institute of Windsor, and is a current member of the Board of Directors of Iona College in Windsor. As spiritual leader of Congregation Bethel, Devorah loves empowering all in the community to learn and grow in their Jewish identity and knowledge. She is grateful to be called to clergy and spiritual work, and prays simply that she will be a blessing to those she is honored to serve. Devorah is married to Jim, and they are parents to 4 teenagers, young adults, Ethan, Ryan, Ellie, and Sophia. Please join me and welcome Cahan Devorah Fick.
All right. There's no feedback, and I just want to make sure they can hear me okay. Are they saying they can? I think they are. All right. Well, good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Thumbs up. Wonderful. I like the thumbs up. Shabbat Shalom on this Remembrance Day here in Canada and Veterans Day in the United States. I think there's a little bit of a nuanced difference between those two holidays and commemorations. Veterans Day in the United States really focuses much more on the people who are in service and who have served. Whereas I feel that Remembrance Day seems to focus a bit more on those who came before us, and specifically those who gave the ultimate price, which is their lives for our freedoms and our safety. And so I am extremely honored to give this talk this morning, especially in the honor of all who came before me and who gave that ultimate price. And with the knowledge that I did not do that. I served and I left and I was in one piece, and I'm grateful for everyone I served with also who made that possible. And so that really leads well into what I'm going to be talking about this morning, and that is servant leadership. Because I will say that a lot more military people would not make it through without harm or without losing their lives, if there weren't for an attitude and a commitment to the idea that not only as military personnel we are serving our country, but we're also serving one another. And as a commander, my ultimate responsibility, I believed, and I continue to believe, was to serve the people who worked for me. Some people get this wrong because they think that they're in leadership and that they are at the top of the game, and so the people around them are there to serve them, but it's actually the opposite. The higher you achieve rank, the more you should realize, if you are a healthy leader in the military, that you are there to serve the people who serve you. Some people have asked me as I've entered into my service as a clergy person, Tora, how was it possible that you were a military officer and you were a commander of 200 plus troops in Iraq? I just don't see it. And I think that they are operating from ideas about military service and about military leadership that really is something that the media puts forth, movies put forth. I was watching a movie the other day, and there was a senior officer. And it was one of the only times I've ever seen a movie, a Hollywood production, where I turned to my husband, who's also a veteran, and I said to him, I believe it. I believe this guy is actually a commander. He was a general officer and commander over many troops. And the reason I believed it in this movie was that he wasn't barking orders at everyone. He was listening to people. He was listening to the people who were there to advise him and serve him. He wasn't on an ego trip. He was very humble, but he was resolved and he was confident in himself and his mission. And that really is where we start to understand servant leadership. I think of servant leadership in a kind of funny Jewish way, because I think of it as having three attributes. And they spell out what could be Chai. Well, it's C-H-I, not C-H-A-I, but we can go with it, right? Chai. So Chai leadership. And if you're Jewish, what does the word Chai mean? It means life. So I like to use that as my acronym in a very apropos way, because military people really like acronyms. Compassion, which is demonstrating empathy and understanding toward others. Humility, recognizing one's own limitations, valuing the contributions of others. And integrity, upholding moral and ethical principles in all actions. Now, there's nothing about that that doesn't translate to a clergy member's service as well. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to explain how I have come to a place of understanding that actually what I do and how I do it here is not really all that different from what it was to be a commander of personnel in a war zone. This clearly, thank God, is not a war zone. It's a much more peaceful place. And I always tell people it's so much easier here because I know that at no point am I going to have to ask everyone to lie around because there are missiles flying over us and disrupt their program. And I'm pretty sure in Canada, unless we have a major power outage, I'm going to have electricity. And I'm going to have outlets that match the technology to plug into them everywhere we go. There were so many things, so many difficulties that we had to overcome because it was just an austere environment for very, very simple things like making a microphone work. It was always that way all the time. And so I'm delighted every time I stand up here and lights are on and microphones are working and I don't have to worry about those things. I want to talk to you about some stories that really build a narrative on servant leadership and my theory of this. There is a concept in Judaism called Avodat HaKodesh, and that means sacred service. Avodat HaKodesh. And I think that it's extremely relevant to leadership. This idea that it is a holy thing, it is a righteous and sacred thing to serve other people. And we have some Christians in the room. I don't know if any of you know the servant song. There is a Catholic song, I think it's more common in Catholic circles. The lines to it go, brother, let me be your servant. Let me be as God to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. And that's really what servant leadership relies on. That the commander or the person at the top is serving the people who work for them, and the people below them are also serving that. It's a loop. It's the same kind of thing. One key teaching found in our Talmud emphasizes the importance of humility and service and leadership. It states, whoever humbles himself, the Holy One, blessed be he, raises him up. Whoever exalts himself, the Holy One, blessed be he, humbles him. This passage suggests that leaders who demonstrate humility and prioritize the needs of others will be uplifted and respected, while those who seek personal gain or power will ultimately be humbled. They will be humbled. And I have seen it before, and I'm going to share a brief story about seeing that at one point in my career. I was a second lieutenant, so that means I was in my very first 2 years as an officer. Now, I had been a cadet for 4 years, so when you enter into military service as an officer in the United States, the vast majority of officers have already served as a cadet for 4 years. There are some exceptions with some types of work, like lawyers and doctors, where they fast track people in, but the majority of officers, 80 to 90% in the United States, serve as cadets first. And so you get an idea of what military culture is like. And then they commission you and you have a lot of legal power and not a lot of knowledge. Now, I had somehow the wisdom. When I first went into my first job, I was in charge of about 20 enlisted people. And these were NCOs, non-commissioned officers, sergeants, who were very knowledgeable. Most of them had been in the military for at least 10 years. Some of them 15, some even 20. I had a senior master sergeant who was working for me. That means he was a level 6 officer, a level 6 in the rank of enlisted personnel in the Air Force. He had been in the Air Force for about 20 years. And I was assigned a senior master sergeant, Sergeant McGrath. I still remember his name. He was my first NCO. And he would build me up in public and make it seem that I knew everything that was going on. And in private, he would let me have it. And you know what? I would take it. Because that is the only way you can learn. You have to humble yourself. And other junior officers who could not take it and would push back, the loyalty of those NCOs would start to erode. And it doesn't mean that those NCOs wanted that loyalty to that officer. They're human beings, and their trust would start to diminish. Well, for 2 years, I had this staff with this NCO who would build me up in public, make me look awesome, and we'd get behind closed doors, and he would tell me off and tell me all the ways that I was wrong and I needed to grow up and get mature and stop being a baby. And that was the best thing he could have possibly done for me. And because I didn't push back on it, because I learned, I grew. And I grew with respect for the people also who worked for me. Now, 2 years into that job, at about the 2-year point, usually in the US military for junior officers, you'll be moved to a different job. And so we had what was called a change of command, but they wouldn't change out the command of everybody in the unit all at the same time. That would be really bad. So over the course of about 6 months, you would see an officer turnover every couple of years. And the first person to go was our squadron commander, who I also was terrified of. This man was known for being extremely mean to people. And he had some problems in the squadron for the officers hiding things from him because they didn't want to get in trouble. And I was very grateful because I not only had my senior NCOs to take care of me, but I also had a major in our squadron who took me under his wing and mentored me. And he was very good to me. And he kept me out of the path of this colonel who was known for being really hard. And that was a really good thing. I had someone who was telling me off behind closed doors, and I had a major who was calling me up and saying, he's coming over go out your back door and come over here so he can't find you. That was the kind of thing that would happen. Not that I'd done anything, but I was somehow want you fired with this. So the new colonel came and he meant well with this. He knew there had been problems. He knew there had been fear and intimidation and the prior leadership. And so he called up my office and wanted to talk to senior NCO, my senior pastor. And he said, I would like all of you to come to this room tomorrow at 10 a.m. and I want to have a commander's call. I want to talk with all of you about what's going on in your perspective on past leadership and how you can improve. He meant really. So the next day at 10 a.m., we all showed up at the commander's call, and at the door, I was met by the colonel who said, you may go. Those are words that you really want to hear usually as an officer. He said, you're not being fired yet, but I just want to talk to your people by myself and I don't want you here. So I walked out and I was a little shaken, but I kept going over in my mind. I have done nothing wrong. So I don't think I should be afraid of anything. And I'm only a second lieutenant, about to become a first lieutenant. So probably I'm not going to lose my career for something that he comes up with. I walked back to my office and I sat down and I thought for a few moments. And about 10 minutes after I came back to my office, I heard a lot of noise. All of my people were coming back into the building. And I thought, well, that was a really short commander's call. So my senior NCO walked into my office and he shut the door and he said, Lieutenant, I think I'm going to be fired and I want you to know why before he comes over here and fires. And I said, what happened? Not only am I going to get fired, my senior NCO is not going to get fired. And we don't even know why. And he said, we all stood up when you left and we said, if she's not with us, we're leaving. He said, we did not like very much that our commander, our boss, was shut out of this meeting. What was this about? And he said, and then I said something I probably shouldn't. If you're trying to dig up to you've barked up the wrong tree. Sounds very much like something an NCO would say, but usually not to a colonel. So they were dismissed as well, and lo and behold, the commander walked back over to my building, and he came into my office and kicked my senior NCO out and said, we need to have a talk. And I said, okay, well, where do we begin? And he said, I have never seen anything like this. And I thought I was going to get it. And then he said, I have never seen such loyalty from people like that. I don't know how you have done that, but that is really what I'm looking for. I earned that somehow in my just being naive and being new, because I knew what I didn't know, and I knew there was a lot more that I didn't know. And so I humbled myself and served people. And it was a huge lesson because in my entire career, I realized that was all I had to do. I didn't have to be right. I didn't have to be smart. I didn't have to be the strongest or the wisest. I just had to shut up and listen to people. I had to be kind to them and I had to serve them. And if they were people who were worth my time in leadership, they would serve me back. I realized that very quickly. He actually told me this was a huge lesson in leadership for him. He also went on to fire one of my colleagues that day. He's a major, and his people did not react the same way. His people used this as an opportunity to vent about their commander and all of the problems that they had had. But it was in my second year of service, one of the biggest lessons I could have learned in my life and in leadership. The Talmud also encourages leaders to listen and consider the opinions of others. It teaches a ruler who issues a decree without consulting the sages causes the destruction of the world. I'll read that again. A ruler who issues a decree without consulting the sages causes the destruction of the world. This passage suggests that leaders should seek counsel and involve others in decision-making process, recognizing the value of diverse perspectives. By doing so, they can make more informed and equitable decisions, demonstrating a servant-like approach that considers the well-being of the community. In other words, it's not all about you. There are other people here who might have ideas and needs, and if we're just serving our own needs and we're not listening to other people, we can miss a lot. Now, I want to tell you another story. This is a story when I think I made a decision that I will always be really surprised about. I'm not really sure how I knew to do what I did. I think it was just good luck and that I couldn't sleep at night the night before I made this decision. It kept me up, and so I went with my heart instead of my head in this situation. There was an airman, and I think some of you have heard this story on in a sermon that I've given, but I'll tell the story again. Most of you have not heard this story. There was an airman who came to our leadership. He went to the first sergeant and he said, I know I'm not allowed to take leave while I'm in school. I was a commander in charge of a bunch of students, about 1,200 students. And he said, I know I'm not allowed to take leave while I'm in school, but my parents are getting married in a couple of weeks and I would like to go to their wedding. Now, the first sergeant, who was a nice man, this was a good guy. He said, you know the policy, I can't let you go. So the airman hung his hat and he left. And the next day he went back to the first sergeant's office and he said, I need you to reconsider. I can't call up my parents and tell them that you said no. I can't do this. Will you please listen to my story and tell me, and give me some consideration? Just give me a moment to tell my story. And the first sergeant said, no, it is against the policy if I let you go and it's not a death in your family. All these other students are going to wonder why you were allowed to go, and I'm going to have a big problem because I can't make these decisions for every single individual. We have to have a standard of how we decide these things. And the first sergeant was right. We couldn't just make exceptions to these rules. It would be very, very disruptive. So the airman left, very upset, and the next day he went back to the first sergeant. It sounds like a story about a rabbi. He went back the third time. There was something about duties, right? And he said, please reconsider. And the first sergeant looked at him and said, I am done with you. The only person who can approve this is the lieutenant. Are you going to walk over to her office and waste her precious time with this? And the airman said, I have no choice. I have to do this. My parents will never. And so he said, okay, fine. He phoned me up. And he said, there is an airman over here who wants to take leave and it's not something you would approve. And I need you to talk to him. Do you want to talk to him? Do you have to? I said, okay, we'll send him over. So the airman came into my office, and of course, at this point, he was very shaken and probably on the verge of tears and was desperate. And I could tell that he was really, really going out of his way to get approval beyond anything I've ever seen. So I sat him down and I said, tell me what is really going on here. This is just a wedding. It's your parents. I understand this would be very important to your family, but what is really going on? And he wrote down, and he said, my parents have been married for 25 years. But then, this was it must have been about 2005. He said, 4 years ago, On September 11th, my father, who was a police officer for the New York City Police, got a call to the World Trade Center. And he and his friends went there, and of his entire unit, he is one of, I think he was either the only one or one of a handful of people who could survive. He said after that, my father was so traumatized and guilt-ridden that it ruined my parents' marriage. And so they got a divorce. But then he has really worked on this, and they've worked on their marriage, and they're getting married again. And the reason that I came into the Air Force was to serve my country after 9/11. And it would be really helpful to me if I could go to their wedding. It's just one weekend, we don't even have school that day. And I said, the policy is that I cannot allow you to go. I do have the power to let you go, but the policy is that I should not let you go. Why don't you go home, and I'm gonna go home tonight, and I will think about this, and I want you to come back here at 6 in the morning, and I will have an answer. So I went home that night, and I went to bed, and I did not sleep, and I did not sleep. And I thought, if I cannot sleep over this, something is really wrong. Now, you have to understand, I was only about 25 years old. I didn't have a lot of life experience at this point. But I recognized that my resolve in these situations was usually fairly unbending. I knew what my job was, and I knew how things worked. And I knew that letting him go, I was allowed to do this, and when I put my signature on that piece of paper for his leave, it was a done deal, but my boss was not done with me. I knew that. So I walked into my office that morning, and he was sitting there waiting for me. It was probably about 5:45 in the morning, waiting for me. And I said, I'm gonna let you go. I want you to know that I'm gonna let you go, and I'm going to get in trouble. But I'm gonna let you go, and I signed. And he took it back to the first sergeant, and 5 minutes later, I got a phone call. And it was the first sergeant. He said, the colonel is gonna be after you so bad. It was that mean colonel, by the way. Remember I told you about him on the meeting? He said, the major's not going to talk to you. And I said, I couldn't sleep at night. And then I told him the story, and he got really quiet. And he said, you know what, LT, you're gonna be in big trouble, but bravo. And I did get in trouble. In the Air Force for an officer, that doesn't mean a lot, but it means you get yelled at. And I didn't really care, because in the room with me was the first sergeant and the major. And I knew that they had respect for me for my decision. And I could respect myself, because I would serve the person who worked for me and served me in the best way I could think possible. And about a month later, he came into my office and he said, I have a gift for you. And it was a coin from the New York City Police Department. His father, if you know anything about the military, the coins, they're like little cards that you give to people, and coin from this unit or this experience or this training, and you can trade them. It's a lot of fun. And he gave me a coin, and I still have it. I wish I had brought it today. I would have shown it to you. I still have that because it really marks for me a moment of real lesson in leadership. So I've shared a couple of stories where I look really good, but I am going to share a story where I don't look so good. The Talmud emphasizes the responsibility of leaders to promote justice and care for the vulnerable. It states, whoever can prevent this household from committing a sin, but does not, is held accountable for the sins of his household. If he can prevent the people of his city from committing a sin, but does not, he is held accountable for the sins of the people of his city. If he can prevent the whole world from sinning, but does not, he is held accountable for the sins of the whole world. This teaching highlights the duty of leaders to actively engage in the well-being of their communities and work towards justice. demonstrating a servant-like commitment to the welfare of others. In the year 2007, I had a baby. My daughter, Sophie, was born. You now know she's taller than I am, and she is 16 years old. She was born on October 30th, 2007, and I was a captain at this point. That meant I had a lot of freedom. I had a lot of power, and I started to have just enough knowledge where I could really do a really good job and be comfortable in what I was doing. And I wasn't really getting yelled at by my NCOs anymore. I kind of had arrived. As a captain, you get more money and you get more responsibility. And a lot of officers say that's the very best rank. Captain is awesome. Because you also can't get in a ton of trouble yet. Stu's nodding. Captain's the best, right? So I was a captain, and I had been in the Air Force at this point for about 5 years. With 4 years as a cadet, so about 9 years of service at this point. And I had my baby, and I went back to work, and I had my own office. And I had my own schedule. I had my flight. A flight is like a squad in the Army. And people worked for me, and we had meetings, and I set up the times of the meetings. I didn't have to really do anything on anyone else's timeline except my boss and his boss. And we would maybe have 1 or 2 meetings a week that I was obligated to go to, and that was about it. This was really great because I was a nursing mom. And I wanted to give my baby the very best thing that I could, even if I was working 12-hour days and I was possibly going to deploy, which I did have to do when she was 6 months old. But when I went back to work, I was able to pump my milk and give her breast milk, and I felt really good about it. And the people who worked for me knew this. And so they would leave me alone. If I had my door closed, they knew why my door was closed, and not much else changed though in the unit. But I was really proud of the fact that I did there. Now, about a month into doing that, my senior NCO, my senior master sergeant, this time was a woman, and she came to me and she said, "We have some exercises next week." So military exercises are not like push-ups and sit-ups. That's physical training. Military exercises are battle exercises. You have a scenario and you have to act out the scenario. There's maybe a bomb in a building, have you back to the building. Everybody goes on these 24-hour shifts, and it usually lasts 2 or 3 days. We have an exercise, and Sergeant Smith, who also had her baby right around the time you did, is supposed to be out in the field, and she's asking for us to make an exception and allow her to stay inside the building because she has to pump for her baby. And Captain, we can't make exceptions for these things. Everybody's gonna have something. Everyone's gonna have something. I wish I had learned more from that example when I was a lieutenant. Sometimes when you get more power and you're more distant from your people, I didn't know Sergeant Smith all that well. I knew who she was. I didn't know her personally. And sometimes when you start to ascend in leadership, you start to forget people aren't right in front of you, and their stories aren't quite as tangible as they have been in the past. It's kind of like forgetting what it was like to be a kid. Sometimes I forget what it was like to be a kid. And then I come to the religious school and they remind me, right? I remember what it's like to be a kid. Well, I'd forgotten what it was like to be accepted in this situation. So I denied her being able to do that. And nothing happened to me. She stayed where she was supposed to stay. I'm sure it was quite inconvenient for her for a couple of days. She probably was fine, I didn't hear that she had gotten an infection. Nothing terrible happened. You know, I will tell you that about 6 months later, I was deployed to Iraq, no longer able to nurse my baby. That was unfortunate for me, but I accepted it. And someone came up to me and said, "Did you hear about the new policy in the military? The DoD has put forth this policy and they wanted a bunch of commanders to sign off on it and say that they are fighting for this new policy that mothers who are nursing are protected from deployment before a year." Well, I was on a deployment at the time before a year. And that they are protected from things like what this woman had endured, where she was not allowed to care for her body during those couple of days. And my friend said, "You should sign this and you could be like a poster child for this." And I signed it, but I couldn't be a poster child because I knew what I had done. I knew that I had not stood up for something that I believed in, and even worse, I had been a hypocrite. Because while she was not able to take care of her body and her baby, I had made mistakes. Nothing changed for me because I had power, and I had not served her. And I've always been very ashamed of that. It sounds like not a great, huge thing, but it actually was, because it caused me to examine who I really was and what I was doing and what I was. Thank God it wasn't something that affected someone permanently. But I'm sure that people noticed the hypocrisy. Sometimes we get advice from people who are there to also serve us, but it's not necessarily the best or in step with the culture and our ideals. And in that case, also, I didn't want to stand up to my senior NCO and say, no. So I'm going to talk to you now a little bit about what servant leadership is like, what it is, and why I believe so strongly in it. It fosters a sense of inclusivity, gets everybody on board. Like I said, there's that loop, right? I'm serving you, and you're serving me. And so we have accountability for each other. And in the military, this works really, really well. But I also think in spiritual life, in spiritual communities, this often works really, really well. And that's why I think that it transfers really well and translates really well to our situation here with you. When I was in Iraq, I knew that they had some problems with troops getting sent home from units. And so I brought my people together and I said, look, these are the things that other people are doing in other units and they're getting in trouble for. And I don't have time for this. And you don't have time for this. So I need you to commit right now to each other. Not to yourself, but to everybody around you. You're going to spare everybody around you from this kind of thing, scandal and lack of manning because someone gets sent home. That means the work still has to get done. And if everybody here stays the entire deployment, when we get to Qatar, I'll buy you all a beer. Now I have 300 people serving me that were going to be there that day. And the day we got to Qatar, about 9 months later, one of my airmen came up to me and said, you know, Captain, everybody's over there waiting for their beer. Not one of them were sent home. I was able, anything that happened in our unit was of a magnitude that I was able to keep it behind closed doors in my purview. And I didn't tell them. There was accountability. There was servitude to each other. I started a few minutes late, and so in about 3 minutes, I want to open up for questions here, but I want to just talk about one last thing about servant leadership. It sounds so wonderful, doesn't it? Wow, what a great idea. There are some problems with this. There are some pitfalls. If you're serving people who can't rise to the occasion of accountability and integrity, you're gonna have problems. And the good thing in the military was that there was a culture there of integrity and service and excellence. And so it was a wonderful place where this would work. And I also think spiritual leadership is the same thing. Generally, people are not coming to the synagogue to cheat me or steal from me or lie to me. They're coming here because they want to be better and they want to do good work in their lives and in the lives of other people and to serve one another. So it works here. I will say that in other places, this type of leadership may not be a good fit. I think the biggest thing that a person has to watch for in this kind of leadership, and as congregants, this is also something you should watch for, because I'm encouraging you to think about this as you serve the community together. This is a really good model for us to have as a Jewish community, but burnout is really real. And you'll see that even in communities, there's just a handful of people, and this is almost always the way in a spiritual community. A handful of people will do the majority of the work. You might have a congregation with 1,000 people, and it's going to be the same 50 people who are doing the majority of the work. And in a congregation like mine here in Windsor, where we have about 120, 115 families, you think? We're about there? Yeah, we have probably the same 15, 20 people who are volunteering over and over and over. Watch for that. I did get burnt out at a certain point, and it took me a year, I would say, in the military to recover from burnout. You have to watch for that. Are you getting resentful about things that used to make you happy to do to serve others? Are you needing more sleep? Are you actually like not feeling like you want to serve and you're starting to do things because you're getting something out of it, not for the sake of service? Those things are indicators. You have to watch for that in your service and back off. It's okay to say, you know, I've done a lot of volunteering in the kitchen for kiddishes lately, and I think I just maybe need a month off. That's better than pushing through and not saying anything. The bottom line is, though, I think when it comes to this, that when you lead as a servant, it's not about you. That's really, really the thing that echoes in my mind over and over. Every decision I make, everything I do in this place, there are things that I would prefer to be one way or the other. But at the end of the day, it's not about me. I'm not here to get what I need. I'm here to give the community what they need. I will invite questions. I think there's some maybe on the Zoom. You don't see any, we forgot to tell them. Oh, okay. And then if you have any questions, I'll take one or two from this room. Is she doing it right now? She might have told. That's what, see. Okay. But they'll be on the chat. If there's anyone here, well, so you can type questions in the chat. I'll take if there's anyone here who has a question in the room, we can start with that and then go to anything in the chat. Is there any question that anyone has? When I put people on the spot and they don't, and then when I don't ask and I forget, people will say, Deborah, I do this thing. I can never seem to hear it. Sure, yeah.
There's somebody commented on the key stories and the third one really don't think that they I think one thing is that you recognize the leader comment.
Yeah. Yeah, so what Cheryl said goes online is that even when we let someone down in our leadership, if we can recognize that we did that and we can change course, I'm adding words to what you said, but my own take on it too is that changing course and learning from our mistakes, if we can do that, we might always have regret over the mistake we made. But I did learn from that. I learned big time. And I will say in my first story where the commander had made a mistake, you know, it was a really good model to me because he admitted to me that he had made a mistake and that he was being honest about that. And so that was a really good thing for me. Okay, so what is it?
Where was there a seminal moment that made you change your career from the military to the clergy?
Okay, was there a seminal moment that made me change my career from the military to clergy? Well, I will tell you what happened exactly. I was still recovering kind of from being burnt out. And I was teaching at Michigan State University, and I had planned though after that job, it was a job to kind of recover. And it was a really good job and I liked it. And I liked teaching at the university, but it was only a 2-year job. And I was coming to the end of that 2 years and I knew that I was going to go back out and do the more active work again. And I was gearing up for that and I was okay. And my husband said, if we weren't going to stay in the military, what would you want to do with your life? And I said, I have no idea. I can't imagine doing anything else. And I really love what I do. And he said, I would really like to go to law school. So I said, well, why don't you apply for law schools and just see, you know, take the LSAT and just see how you do. Let's work this out. A couple of weeks later, he signed up to take the LSAT. And a couple of weeks later, one of my colleagues was another captain. I was a captain at this time. There was another captain. Came into my office and he had a newspaper and he slapped it on my desk. And it was a copy of the Air Force Times, which is like the New York Times, but for Air Force people. Slapped it on my desk and he had it folded to a specific story. And he said, "You need to take a look at this." And what it was is that the Air Force had decided that because of the recession that had started in 2008, at this point, this was 2010, that they had too many officers in certain year groups. So certain ranks of officers, not all of them, had not gotten out of the military at the same rate that they did. So they were offering us $200,000 to leave if you were in a certain group and you were a certain career field and it was very specific. And I looked on the list in this article and there were like 4 or 5 slots that I qualified for. And what it was a telephone. You called it, you know, the radio where you need to be the ninth caller or whatever. They said, call on this day at midnight, and the first people in line to apply for it, for those slots, are the ones who will get it. So I stayed up at night in my office at Michigan State University all night long, and right at midnight, I made the phone call, and I got through. They had hundreds of phone calls that night, but I was one of whatever 4 or 5 in my year group for certain qualifications. So I just took that as a nod that this was destiny's reason. So then I got out and I didn't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to just go to the library with my daughter. She was 4 at the time. It was going to be great. I was going to be super mom. And I was miserable and she was miserable too. So I put her in preschool and I said, I gotta figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And my husband was in law school at the University of Montana. And I said, I think I'm going to go and apply for a degree in social work, do an MS. So I called up the social work department at the University of Montana, and I don't want anyone to think that this is indicative of their social work department. This was just my 3-minute experience. They were extremely rude to me. It was kind of weird. Someone was having a really bad day. And I called at the wrong time and talked to the wrong person. And so with this, I hung up the phone and I thought, I don't need this. I'm just looking for something to do. I want to go back to school. And immediately I thought, no, I used to play the piano. Maybe it would be nice to go study music and just have a good time. So I called up the music department at the University of Montana and I said, hey, I used to play the piano. Could I talk to someone? And I went to the music department and I played the piano for the music professor there. Now I had not played for 12 years. And he looked at me and he said, 2 years. If you play for 2 years and study with a grad student for a couple years, then you could audition for our program. But do you sing by any chance? And I said, I've been in some choirs. And he said, well, our music department has a problem this year. The voice department has had a record low number of applicants this year for the voice department. And if you can just sing on key at all, they might take you. And you just want to have a good time. So he walked me down to the voice department and I met with the professor there. 2 weeks later, after setting me up with a grad student to teach me a couple of songs to audition with, they called me up and said, welcome to the vocal music program at the University of Montana. And they taught me to sing. And that was really the moment because it kind of set me up for every single thing else that happened. I think that the key with that was that at that point, I really didn't have any idea of what I was really supposed to do in my life. I had just let go of everything. And so I was open to whatever God had for me. And then I converted to Judaism, and then my husband also passed away at that time. And when you have not a lot of things that have worked out and you're kind of at the bottom and you hit rock bottom of everything, it opens you up to make some big life changes and choices. You have the ability to do that. And so that's what I did. I simply said, okay, I have to make some choices. I have to move somewhere. I have to do something here. And at that point, I converted to Judaism, and I thought, why not go become a cantor? And so that was really, it was from a point of absolute loss and devastation. All right, and I think maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Now, I'll try to be a little shorter. Sheila also has a question.
Yeah. How do you square servant leadership with political leadership of all?
Okay, so the question is, how do I resolve, like, what was your word for it?
It's a square with how does it compare?
Okay, how does servant leadership compare with the political leadership of the world? I think that it's possible to have a servant leadership model pretty much in any group of people. You just have to be, like I said, you have to be very if there are people in your organization where there can't be trust, you're going to have problems. And that's why in the military, I think in religious organizations that work so well, because there's a certain understanding of an ideology. With politicians, I do think it's possible. You know, I have not had a political career, so I'm just telling you. But okay, we'll put that back. So I do think it's possible, but I think it would be hard. Yeah, yeah. But I have to stop because they are saying stop.
Yes. And okay. Stop and let them.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, it's just.
Well, and Colony. Sarah, can you guys hear us? Can you hear us here in London? So next, we have to go to start our service, but next Saturday at noon, we have former Canadian ambassador to Israel, John Allen, on with a Torah study for us. So I'm putting a little note in the chat, and then I will give you the link that will give you the link. It's on our website. So if you're interested in joining us, again, it's next Saturday at noon. It's our Torah study. It's Zoom only. And he's going to come and answer questions about Israel. So thank you so much, Devorah, always a pleasure. Lovely to see you guys, Kol Ami, and I hope we get to see each other again soon.
Okay. Thank you very much to Congregation Bethel. Thank you for sharing your Chazan with us today. Thank you, Devorah, for your service to your community and to your country. And we really do appreciate you giving us this talk today. We've all learned something about you and about your service, and it's an honor to welcome you and your community to join us today. So thank you so much for the presentation. Okay. So we'll get on to our services now. So we're going to open up the doors, let people in. So thank you all for joining us.